Hello and welcome to the Still Standing series. I'm your host, Coach Violet Coots, and I'm happy to have my special guest with me today, Norton. Um, I am a Christian life coach, equipping and empowering women and individuals to live in their true identity and be who God created them to be, living in the freedom Christ died to give us. I'd love for you to grab my free biblical affirmation card so you can start renewing your mind and finding that freedom. And if you're feeling stuck in any area of your life, schedule a free call with me. The link will be in the show descriptions. Hello, Amber. How are you?
Hi, Violet. I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Good. I am doing well as well. It's good to have
Good.
you here with me today, and I'm excited for you to share your testimony. And so I'll let you just start by just introducing yourself a little bit to the audience, and then we'll move into the testimony.
Hey. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. And my name is Amber Norton, and I'm a registered nurse as well as a holistic life practitioner. And what that means is that I help people who are getting stuck, as you say, um, just kind of stuck in a burnout mode, maybe stuck in grief, and I help people with setting their boundaries as well. So that's just a little bit about where I am right now.
Right. Yes. Yes. And one thing, and this will be part of your testimony probably, but Amber and I share in the fact that we have both lost our spouses, and so we've got that, and unfortunately in common. But it's part of both of our stories. And God, though, is an awesome God. So anyway. I'm going to just ask you to and turn this over to you, Amber, and let you start sharing what you felt love to share today.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, as Violet said, my first husband passed away in October of 21. But let me go back just a little bit before that. I grew up in a Christian home, went to church for the first time when I was 2 weeks old. Mom said I was at the very bottom of my little sleeper bag when they got me to church. And I grew up in the church. I went to Bible college as a new, you know, freshly out of high school student, and continue to grow in my faith. There were times where, I got stagnant. I think maybe there are times where a lot of us get stagnant in our faith. Um, but God has always been part of my life. I've always been trusting of Him, um, always believing in His, faithfulness and goodness to us. And when my husband passed away, it was October of 2021, I, for the first time, lost hope. And that was a new experience for me. In my grief, I didn't turn away from God. I want to make that clear. I did not, I didn't question what God's plans were. Um, I just didn't feel that I had any hope anymore. Um, Carl died from septic shock, which were infections related to infections that he acquired while he was in the hospital. He had been in for heart failure and kidney failure and then sent home. His heart was back in rhythm, his kidneys were improving, um, but we didn't know that he had acquired these infections. And when he was discharged on a Sunday, um, it was Wednesday when he couldn't stand up anymore. I kept trying to get him off of a chair. I tried helping him to the bed, and he couldn't, he just couldn't do it. And so finally, I had to call 911 again. And I don't know, I think that was like the fourth or fifth time within a year's time that I had to call 911 for him. Previously, he did not like it when I called 911. He would, he was very angry with me those times. Usually he was delusional due to dehydration or other situations, or COVID, actually. That was the first time I had to call. But this last time was different. He told me to call 911.
Mm.
He knew that there was something going on. He knew that, actually, I think he knew that he was dying. He asked me that morning if I thought he was dying. Um, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if he was or not. And, um, but that afternoon, when I had to call 911, I was concerned. Um, he uh, got to the hospital that Wednesday afternoon. They were very quick about doing blood cultures, and they were recognizing the signs of sepsis in him.
Mm.
And um, it was very obvious that he was very sick. So the next day, they finally got him into a hospital bed in the ICU. Um, I, oh, just obviously I was praying. I had all my prayer warriors, all the texts going back and forth, Um, that that Thursday, he had a really hard time talking. I couldn't understand his speech at all. And just sat by his bed trying to, kept saying, What did you say? You know? Um, and and another thing that he had never allowed happen before was that he allowed his brother to come see him. Any other time he was in the hospital, he would not want visitors. I was the only person that he would let into the room. Um, but this time he was okay if his brother came to see him. And again, I knew this is not a good thing and not a good sign. Uh, and even his brother had a hard time understanding him that Thursday. But on Friday, his speech was perfectly clear. We could understand everything. It almost seemed like he was turning a corner. Um, we had good conversations with him. Uh, all the doctors kept giving us this hope um, that, we're going to fix things. He saw infectious diseases, he saw a nephrologist, the cardiologist. The cardiologist, however, was the only one who knew how serious this was. And he was not, I'd say he was not giving us hope. Um, but he was not giving up either.
Right.
Um, but he knew what was going on. Um, they wanted to start him on dialysis for his kidneys. And, it was always, well, let's see what happens tomorrow. Let's see what happens the next day. Um, then came Saturday morning, and I got to his hospital room because it was during COVID time still. So, I had certain times where I was allowed to be there.
Mm.
And I got there, I guess 8 o'clock was probably my start time. Um, Walked into his, actually, first of all, I had to put a gown and mask and gloves on because of his infections. And that was to keep them in the room and not to come out with us. Uh, so I was putting on my PPE. I heard him asking the nurse, "Do you think I'm dying?"
Oh,
Like, oh
wow.
man, here we are again. And she wasn't. I mean, I couldn't hear her response, so I have no idea how she responded. When I walked in the room, he was sitting up in the bed, or the head of the bed was up, and I looked at his breakfast tray and I was like, there's only a piece of toast on here. Is that what I ordered? It's like, yeah, I don't want anything. I'm like, okay. So I stood at the foot of the bed and I put apple jelly, because that's what they gave him, some apple jelly on his toast. And as I was putting it on the toast, he started having problems breathing. And his oxygen levels were staying normal, but he just couldn't get breath in. And by the time I, well, actually, there was no oxygen for me to be able to put on him in the room. Um, the nasal cannula, that tube that goes up the nose, um, that had fallen on the floor earlier in the day, and I'd picked it up and was like, I'm not using that. He's not getting that. Um, I looked out the room. There was nobody at the nurse's station. Nobody was around. Finally, I saw this girl wearing blue scrubs, bright blue scrubs. It's like, you're a respiratory therapist. I need you in here now. I don't know where you're going, but get in here if you
Right.
can't
Yeah.
breathe. And so she did. She came right in, um, started using that same nasal cannula. And I said, nope, you've got to get a new one. And so she did. Um, and within minutes, they were talking about intubating him. And I knew I'd been told by one of the other nurses that once he needs to be intubated, that he's not coming back.
Oh, wow.
That was going to be the of end of life. Um, and oh, I was so scared. Um, so I left him in the room, in their care, and was escorted to the waiting room. Um, it was a Saturday morning, so really no visitors. Nobody was out in the waiting room. Uh, I got out there and I just bawled and bawled, and nobody was with me. Nobody from the hospital, no staff. Um, I was texting my parents and um, uh, uh, others, probably one of the ministers at my church. Um, and I told them that I was like, just come on up. If you want to say goodbye to him, come on up. Um, the policy at the hospital was that you could only have two named visitors. So me and his brother were the named visitors. Um, but once death was imminent, then anybody could come see him. Um, and so my brother and my parents, started making plans to come up to see him. I called his brother, let him know what was going on. They came. Um, and it was several hours. Well, it was, I don't know, hour, 2 hours, something like that, before they let me back in the room. I guess they had problems with the intubation. Um, and he was uh, medicated so that he wasn't responsive to us. But it was while his brother was in the room with him that he woke up and to find out that he was intubated and couldn't talk to us. And they had put soft wrist restraints on his
Oh,
wrists so that he wouldn't try to pull the tube out. And he was fighting those so bad. Um, I got back in the room, and the first thing I said was, "I love you," and he mouthed, "I love you" back to me. Um, and I'll never forget that. That was
yeah.
the last thing that I heard from him. Um, and through all of this, I kept praying. I was like, God, you can heal him. I know you can still heal him. Um, and that afternoon, after everyone had been there, and I'm sure he was like, what are all these people doing here? You're not supposed to have this many people in here, and all this stuff. So I'm sure he knew what was going on, but we just didn't talk about it.
Mhm.
And if I have any regrets, that's one of them. Um, so we went home, said goodbye. So I might see him in the morning. And we weren't home for maybe a half hour. And I got a call from the doctor. And they said that the nurse, um, the nurse thinks you need to be here tonight. So uh, my brother drove me down. He was allowed to stay overnight with me, which I was so thankful to have him
Yeah.
with me. Um, Carl was awake, I mean, the entire night. Um, the At like 2 a.m., one of the resident doctors, or maybe he was a fellow, I forget his title now, but he was a doctor, came in the room and I heard him talking with a nurse. So at this point, Carl has a one-on-one nurse, somebody in the room all the time with him. And I heard him talking to the nurse as I was in the recliner. And he said, you need to tell her that we can't do anything more. He's all the medications are at like the highest threshold that they could do. He was on 4 different meds for his heart. His blood pressure just kept dropping. And so his nurse said, well, you can talk to his wife. You tell her. And so at that point, I went ahead and got up and talked to him. But we were on either side of Carl's bed. And he's telling me these things. And I'm looking over at my husband and I'm like, he's hearing what you're saying. Like he's awake. He knows
Right.
what's going on. And he's like, well, you need to make a decision because I had the healthcare power of attorney. So it was my decision at that point. Carl was still with it. He still had his mind. And thankfully, I knew that. After the doctor left, I went around to the other side of Carl's bed where the doctor had been, because that's kind of where his head was turned, that direction. And I looked him in the eyes and I said, they want me to stop the medications. They want everything to be stopped. Are you okay with that? And his eyes got so big. And he's like shaking his head no as much as he could while being tied down. And I'm like, okay, so you want me to say, you want to just keep doing what we can. And he's nodding his head. And I could just hear him thinking, are you trying to kill me? Like, you know, like,
Yeah.
why are you even asking me these questions?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, yeah, okay. Uh, that's what we'll do. Everything that we can. Um, and and so that's why I told the doctor. I didn't leave the room, but because I still had my gown on and stuff. But across the hall, I said, "We're gonna keep going and doing this." He's like, "All right." Um, so that's what we did. That Sunday morning, the next day, he came. Well, not he. Let's see. They were doing shift change, so between the nurses, and this was a God thing. He had the same nurses that he had had the week before when he was in the hospital. And so he knew all these, there were mostly men that were on his
Okay.
team. And so he knew these guys, from before. And I just thought that was really cool that they knew him, he knew them,
Yeah.
um, and I knew them. It wasn't like I had to meet another new nurse or anything.
Yeah.
Um, So they were doing the shift change, and it was about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. No, 7:30 is about that time. And actually one of the nurses called me up to like listen into the report. Um, they started, doing all of his assessment, checking his pulses. Well, he had no pulses in his feet at this time. They got the Doppler, which is like a little ultrasound, almost like a pen ultrasound, to try to find the pulses, and there were none. Um, at this point, his eyes were closed and he was becoming more unresponsive. Um, they asked him, before, like he could give him a thumbs up when they would ask. This time, nothing. And I'm just looking at him like, oh no, yeah. Watching his blood pressures dropping like 40s over 20s, um, which, yeah, it's very low. Um, and I just kept thinking, at what point, when do I make the call? And shortly after that, the nurse was getting ready to like give him his medicines or and change the bags of his medicines. And I said, don't worry about it. It's not helping him. He's gone,
Mm.
you know. And they're like, okay, And so then, it was just that whole process of making that decision. Um, they extubated him, and oh, I didn't say this part, but he had had an internal pacemaker defibrillator put in earlier that spring. And so they had to put a magnet over it because if once his heart stopped, the defibrillator would shock him and try to bring him back to life. And that
Oh
had
no.
been, well, that was part of the story before. I didn't even go into all that part. Um, but through all of this, there was, I don't know, it was a weird sense of peace, I think, but oh, extreme sorrow, extreme sorrow. Um,
Yeah.
my brother came up next to me, when he just hit one button on the pump and everything stopped. And within seconds, Carl was gone.
Oh, wow.
Um, so it was about, I don't even know the exact time anymore. I say 8:15-ish on a Sunday morning. Um, the first person I called was Carl's son, who lived out in Colorado. Um, and we're in Ohio at this point. And all I said was, he's gone. And, Matt just lost it. He's like, I'll call you back later. Um, it's funny. I don't remember if I texted people or called them or what anymore. Um, but my parents came, my our care minister at the church and his wife came. A good friend of mine who's had been a chaplain in a previous career, she came. And then Carl's brother and sister-in-law were there. And we all stayed at his bedside till about noon. I think they brought us in a cart for some breakfast type items. And I know they eventually brought in a cart for some lunch type items
Gotcha.
because we were in there so long. And just having that group of people, all believers, all who knew that Carl's with Jesus now. And that's what I typed in my text. I was like, Carl's with Jesus now.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and, knowing that, oh my, that just, it helps so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Um, I think about how do people who don't have that faith in Jesus, how do they get through this? Um, and I've been writing on LinkedIn for several years about my grief journey um, and other things. And I've met a lot of people who are grieving, and so many of them don't know Jesus, and they are still grieving years and years later. And this is where this is where my testimony comes in, that I know that God does not want us to be grieving the rest of our lives. Grief is deep sorrow. That's how it's described or defined. It is a deep sorrow. I do not have that deep sorrow anymore. I I know that my grief has been healed. Um, I know that God has, oh, He has taken care of me so wonderfully. Um, and when I think about the opportunities that I've had to share that with people, people who don't believe that grief can be healed. They think we're always trying to heal or, on a healing process. And
Yeah.
honestly, I thought that for a long time, for several years. Um, and it wasn't until about 2 years ago that I was talking with somebody who is a Christian, who is a grief coach, and she's the one who first said that God doesn't want us to be grieving for, you know, so long. He gave us joy, you know,
Right.
He gave us so much that grief is a part of what, I mean, those are real emotions.
Right.
We
Yeah.
should grieve. He tells us what in Ecclesiastes, that there's a time for mourning and a time for rejoicing.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
so so it's okay. We should grieve. Um, but that's not our life. That's not what we should be doing for the rest of our life.
Right.
Um, One of the verses that somebody reminded me of was is from Lamentations. I'm going to read it here. Um, Lamentations 3:22 through 24. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for him. And wow, that was, that just reminded me so much that God is a compassionate God.
Yeah.
And oh man, when I think of how much he loves us and how much he wants us to to live in the freedom that he gives us, with joy, with compassion, that who am I to live in grief? That's not my lot in life.
Mm.
Um, having, I had mentioned earlier about the hope and how I had lost it. And um, it wasn't, let's see, it was about almost 2 months after Carl died. Well, during those 2 months, I would be at church and we'd be singing songs, and all those songs kept having the word hope in them. And I was like, I was almost getting irritated in a way, because
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't have hope. Every time that word came up, I stopped singing. I was I was done. Like,
Right. Yes.
come
Yes.
on, God, where is my hope? It's gone. And I, I don't know what brought it up. I wish there are some parts of my memory that I'm like, I wish I had this. But what I do remember is thinking that my hope is in Jesus. My hope is Jesus Christ. My hope is not in doctors. It is not in healing. It is not in all these man-made things. It's not in the medications. My hope is in Jesus Christ. And he hasn't left me or forsaken me.
Yeah.
And that's what I get to hold on to. Um, there were, you know, grief makes us think funny things, doesn't
It does.
it?
It
Like,
does.
Lord, I, I would look at his clothes still in the closet. I was like, okay, God, why are his clothes here and he's not? And then there was the, okay, you healed him now, you can bring him back to me. You know,
Yeah.
like he can do these things. He raised Lazarus from the dead. He can bring Carl back, you know. Um, and I believe that he could have, but that wasn't what his plan
Right.
is. He has other plans. Um, and so today, um, what am I, 4.5 years almost away from Carl's death. Um, I've remarried. Um, Joe and I married last May. He lost his wife 6 months after Carl had died. Um, and so we share that part of our stories. And just right before, let's see, it was the Sunday before Christmas, Joe was baptized. And, so he's growing in his faith um, because of this. If he hadn't met me, he wouldn't have, you know, gotten to be as close to Jesus as he is now. So God is doing things.
Yes. That's so good. So now what has, because you are now holistic life practitioner.
Yes.
And so where did God, so part of your journey is where God has moved you from being the RN, not that you aren't an RN, but from the hospital setting or doctors into this. So how has God brought you here?
Yeah, sure. um, after Carl died, I I was working at the hospital. Um, I had this thought where I didn't, I thought that my profession had killed him. Um, and so I did not want to be a nurse anymore. Um, I even 6 months after he died, I went back to work and I told my boss, I'm I'm done being a nurse. I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I'm here until I figure it out. And she said, okay. And I, a few weeks after that, I was like, I have a platform here. I was teaching a chemotherapy class and I got to talk about infection prevention and sepsis with these brand new oncology nurses. And I went through Carl's story. And so for about a year and a half, every month, I told Carl's story. Um, and so hopefully, patients' lives have been saved just because of his story from those nurses. But I don't know that for sure. Um,
Right.
what I do know is that I did what I could um, to
Yeah.
to help people that way. Um, so yes, I was there
No,
for
I
another
would.
year and a half, and then I left the job. Decided that God had other things for me to do. Um, got my certifications in health and life coaching, and um, and I call myself a holistic life practitioner uh, because life is all about our whole selves. It's not just about work. It's not just about our families or relationships. It's everything integrated together. And um, and so that's what I want to focus on with my clients. Um, and that's what I do focus on is talking about how our whole selves are in need of, well, boundaries is really my big topic um, where I focus. Um, because when we have boundaries in all the areas of our lives, we're going to be more at peace and we're going to find a freedom there. And even spiritual boundaries, you know, that time with God, if we're not carving out that time with him and setting boundaries around our our time with him, around our faith, um, letting in things that are not appropriate for believers, um, then yeah, that's going to affect a lot of our lives. So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
excuse me.
I don't know. I was thinking, as you said, you was there a year and a half and you got to tell Carl's story. I feel like, do you feel like that was also part of your grieving, your healing by being able to do
Yes.
that, that God allowed you to use that to walk you through your grief and to walk you through that grief journey and stuff. So,
Oh, absolutely. Telling his story, well, our story,
right. Yes, of course.
um, is, oh, has been such a tremendous part of my healing journey. Um, I've, yeah, without that, I think when we hold in
Right.
those, I mean, traumatic, it was traumatic.
Yeah. Well, yes.
Um, when we hold in those trauma stories, um, it, it, I don't know, I don't think that it opens us up to healing.
Right. Yeah.
Telling those stories, um, the events that happen, I think that's what's going to lead us toward healing.
Right. Yeah. Do you find, you said you talk to a lot of people and especially ones going through grief. Um,
Mhm.
do you find that a lot of people sometimes feel guilty? That's maybe something that kind of prevents some of the healing is that they feel guilty from being happy again and finding joy. Because I know sometimes I feel like, well,
Oh,
I'll just say for me, when that's going through that, it's like you stop that morning and you just you have a moment that you actually laugh or you enjoy something and then it's almost like, oh my goodness, I just what am I doing? And so, but I think that's
yeah.
part of our healing journey
I
too.
smiled. Oh no.
Right, exactly. And we feel guilty about it. And I like what you said, God, I don't think God has. I'm with you. Grief is real, and I believe we work it out differently in different times and stuff. But I don't believe that we're supposed to stay stuck in it, and different things will happen, but at the same time, my feelings, one of the things it was like, I'm still here. I'm still here. So that means God apparently still has a purpose for me. And so I don't think my husband would want me to live in grief and just stay stuck there. And I don't think that's what God, I don't think that's what God has intended, either. And that's not to shame anybody or make anybody feel any certain way or any condemnation by any means of, how they're feeling and how they're coping or what they're going through. But I think the significant word is healing, and understand that there
Yeah.
is that healing of healing from that grief and in that grief. So
Yeah. Yeah, I would hope that that's an encouragement to somebody. I
yeah,
think what there is a quote from I think it's from Zig Ziglar. I don't know if he originated it or got it, from somewhere else that says something along the lines of we grieve much because we loved much.
right. Yes.
And or we grieve greatly because we loved greatly, something along those lines. And I think that people may interpret that as if I'm not grieving anymore, then I must not love them anymore.
Mm,
And I think that's wrong. We,
right.
like, yes, we we grieve deeply because we love deeply. I get that. We also love them so much that we're going to move on, not move forward, excuse me. I don't
Right.
like move on is not the right word.
Right.
Not we're not moving on from them, but we're moving forward. And um, yeah, I liken it to I like well, grief healing to a wound. I'm a nurse, so I talk about wounds.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
and I think of an abdominal surgery where it's a great big gaping wound, and we have to put a wound vac on there. It's all packed with all of this, all those sponges and gauze and things to help heal that wound. And it hurts. Every time that dressing gets changed, it hurts. That's grief. It hurts every time. But every time that wound is getting, packed again, it's starting the healing process. There's, I'm not going to get into all the details, but all the granulation and all the things that our cells are starting to heal, and if it's done right, everything's going to start closing up. But what's left behind is a scar. And that scar is a reminder that there was a big wound. There was a big gash there. And that's how I think of grief healing. Um, there's a scar. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I got teary-eyed just telling my story, right? It
Right.
doesn't
Yes.
mean that I'm still grieving. It means that I'm remembering. Rem- uh, it means that there's still a scar, but that scar is evidence of healing.
Right.
That's a
That's
good
good.
thing, you
That is
know?
that is. And
So,
yeah, it makes me think of, you know, we still love that person. We still love that we had is still there and will be
yes,
there. But
absolutely.
God has designed us to where we can still hold more love, you know, even like you have a child and it's like, oh, I love that child with all my heart. And then you have another child. Well, you love this child with all your heart as well. And that's a God thing, it's like, how can we love one
Yes.
with our whole heart and then the other one with our whole heart? And how is two, wholes for, how is that? And it's a God thing. And it's
Yeah.
like that
Yep.
capacity. He gives us that capacity to love. Um, and he gives us capacity to live as well.
Yeah.
But so
My
through,
mom,
oh, go ahead.
oh, sorry. My mom is one of 9 children. And she tells the story of somebody who asked my grandma, how how do you love all 9 of them? Like you must have a favorite. And she said something along the lines of, I love each one individually. Like
Yeah,
that, each one is an individual and they all have my love.
yeah,
So
yeah.
she didn't have favorites. I still say I was the favorite grandchild, but that's
Right.
another
Yeah.
story.
Yeah. I understand. I understand. Yeah. And what a beautiful picture of how God loves us. He loves each one of us individually and stuff. So
Yeah.
I do like to ask, my guests, throughout, because you said, you've always been in church and God's always been a part and everything. Do you have like a life verse that has that you've held on to, or maybe one that you picked up along the way, but is there a life verse that you try to cling to, or you do cling to?
Yes, I do have a life verse. And this is one that a friend of mine gave me in when I was in high school, going through some pretty serious mental health issues. Um, and so she said that Jeremiah 29:11, and I know it's everywhere, right? But it's also, I like taking it to verse 13. So I'm going to go ahead and read this. Ah, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart.
Yeah.
And oh boy, did I go back to that hope in the future.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's true.
And, but I think verse 13 is really the key. Um, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart.
Yes, yeah, yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Mm.
So,
And the other thing I like to ask is, knowing what you know now, walking through this grief journey and then what you've been through, what either advice or encouragement would you like to leave with the audience who may also be going through that? And if we haven't gone through grief, and probably everybody has, eventually we will, I think everybody will with
mhm,
some form of grief. It might not be death of a spouse, but there's all kinds of grief that we walk
yeah,
through.
there is. Um, Several things related to grief that it's very individualized. The way that I grieved for my grandparents is was different with all four of them, which is also different from the way I grieved my husband. And so
Yeah.
it's all different. Um, you'll hear of the, 5 phases of grief or 7 phases, or there's so many different rules, I guess, when it
Right.
comes to
Yeah.
grief. You're going to grieve the way that you grieve. There is no right way to do
Yeah.
it. There's no wrong way to do it. There are, you know, different bits and pieces of some of those phases that I never experienced. Um, and some that I know acknowledgement and or acceptance, excuse me, is supposed to be acceptance and hope way down at the very bottom of the list. I accepted it from the very beginning. I was with him, but that's my experience.
Right.
Someone else's experience who maybe wasn't with their loved one at the time of death, they may have a harder time accepting it. It may come a lot later. So know that whatever you're experiencing is normal, is okay.
Yeah.
Um, it's not going to feel okay at the time,
Right.
but it is okay. You're experiencing what you are experiencing. Um, we, in medical community, we talk about pain. Only the patient, the client, only you know what your pain is like. Only you know what your grief is like.
Yeah.
Um, and oh, it's gonna be so different. Also, we don't compare. We don't compare our grief stories. We don't compare how we are expressing our grief. Um, the way uh, I experienced grief with my husband is probably not the same that you experienced it, Violet.
Right.
Um, so yeah, don't, you know, just keep moving forward. That's the big thing. Keep moving forward. Do the grief work. Um, Getting stuck in your grief is not where you want to be at all. And they say I've I've read some of the psychology reports that being stuck in grief is when that extreme sorrow lasts beyond the first year. Um, it doesn't mean that you should be healed or all done with your grief within a year. It just means that that deep sorrow, the I guess almost like depression like symptoms should not last beyond a year. Um, there should be times of joy. There should be days. It's okay to go days without crying by that point. Um, I, I remember, writing different things about, oh, I actually didn't cry today. Like, it, is this okay? How do I feel about this? That I didn't cry today. Um, but yeah, if after a year you still feel like you're stuck in grief, I do recommend seeking help for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're so right. Everyone is different, and but we're individuals. That's true in everything.
Yeah.
If you really, when we really just think about it, how we handle
Yeah.
anything is going to be different and stuff. But anyway, well, I appreciate you being here today, and
Oh, thank you,
and
Violet.
taking us in and being vulnerable and walking us through the journey with you, and sharing, what what God's done, and that He restored your hope. That your hope is restored, and
Mhm. Yes.
you are moving forward, and that there is hope.
Mhm.
There is, because Jesus is our hope. There is always hope. Even
Amen.
when
Amen.
even when we don't think we can see it, when we can grab a hold of, I think when we can grab a hold of that Jesus is hope, and then there is always hope. And okay, I think to that, I'll also say that He meets us right where we are. He meets us right where we are.
Oh,
Wha-
absolutely.
Whatever it is, grief or whatever it is, He meets us right where we are. And that's wonderful.
How cool is that?
Yeah, yes, that's cool.
Yes.
Well, again, thank you for being here. And I always
Well, thank you
close
for having
with
me.
the, oh, you're so welcome. I always close with the promise. I like to remind people of the promise that we find in Isaiah 43:2, because I do believe it is a promise that says, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flames scorch you. And so, if this episode has been encouraging to you, please like and subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this with someone that, they might need to hear about hope as well. Maybe they're going through something similar. And if you're feeling stuck or confused in your walk with God, schedule a free call with me, because He doesn't want you stuck or confused. So until next time, be blessed.